A warm welcome to all participants for a third session of Healthcare Insights powered by RedMed, LBN Tech Solutions, and All Ladies League Digital Transformation Chapter. I am Meghalaya Sindhilkumar from LBN Tech Solutions, your host for the evening. Nourish to flourish, all about nutrition. That's the topic for today. And we have in our midst Dr. Monica Suri, Certified Diabetic Educator, Nutri-Home Clinic. Welcome, Dr. Monica. A little bit about Dr. Monica Suri is a clinical nutritionist and a certified diabetic educator, PhD in nutrition. Her interest lies in devising evidence-based scientific dietary plans. She has authored various research papers published in reputed scientific journals and has also attended national and international conferences on food, nutrition, and health. She is the winner of Roll of Honor for Excellence in Academics. Her passion lies in educating people on the role of nutrition in primary prevention of lifestyle disorders. She is a life member of the Nutrition Society of India and various other associations of repute. She has recently completed her certificate in infection prevention and control for the novel coronavirus COVID-19 from the World Health Organization. Monica's mission is to ensure healthiness of the populace through scientific diets and healthy eating. Welcome to Healthcare Insights, Dr. Monica. Moderating this session is Jay Srinivasan. He has 30 plus years in the healthcare industry, currently leading a connected health venture founded by him, RedMed Health Systems. RedMed focuses on enabling affordable preventive care that promotes wellness, early detection of chronic disease, and prevention of infectious diseases. Welcome, Jay. Handling the Q&A session is Sandhya Rao, co-founder of RedMed, as well as Wikiwear, which creates branded fashion apparel. The format, a moderated discussion by Jay and Dr. Monica. Participants can type any question they may have while the discussion is going on in the chat box. It will be followed by a Q&A session by participants. Over to you, Jay. The floor is all yours.
Thank you, Meghu. A good day to all of you. Thank you for sparing your time on a Saturday to listen to a discussion on an issue that affects all of us, food and nutrition. At the outset, all of us at the All Ladies League, LBN Technologies, and RedMed Health Systems would like to wish you happy holidays and a safe, prosperous, and healthy year ahead. This year, 2020, has been a washout for all of us. Well, most of us, at any rate. It has resulted in huge number of infections, disruptions to daily life, continued cautionary behavior, and fatalities in many families. We hope 2021 would be remarkably different, 180 degrees different, actually, and we could all look back at the end of the year to this period when we faced great odds, survived, and thrived. So, Monica, good to have you here.
Thank you so much.
Let's have a very stimulating discussion that will be of great value to all our listeners and viewers. We are hearing a lot of things today about diet and nutrition, more and more these days, actually. Are the two words, diet and nutrition, synonymous?
Thank you for inviting me to this platform. I would thank Meghalaya, I would thank Jay Srinivasan and Sandhya, all of you. Thank you for having me here. I'm so glad that I'm here to share my little knowledge that I have about nutrition and the related things. And to address the question, Jay, that you have given, the diet and nutrition. Basically, diet is what we eat. The variety of food, the food available to a person that a person ingests is named as diet. And nutrition is basically related to the nutrition. This word is derived from the word nutrient. So the science of study of nutrients is called nutrition. So when the food that we ingest that goes into our body, it gets broken down into the nutrients, and the nutrients are absorbed by our body. So that is the science which we call as the science of nutrition. There's another term I would like to bring up here that has been the buzzword since the COVID onset. That is immunity. And people have been relating this term immunity with health. Immunity is basically the ability of the human body to fight with the diseases, to fight the various infections, the diseases, the bacteria, and the viruses. That is what we call as the immunity in a human body.
So let's pick up on that word, immunity. We have immunity boosting foods, how to build immunity, and so on. Can you shed some light on that,
Yes,
please?
yes, of course. Immunity, as I said, is the ability to fight with the diseases. The immunity is of two types in a human body. One is innate immunity that we get at the time of birth from the parents, the genetic transcription of the immunity which a child gets from the mother through the womb. That is basically to fight with whatever the child needs to at the time of birth and for the next 6 months. And the second type of immunity is acquired immunity that a human acquires during the course of its growth and development through the childhood years and even through the adulthood. And that is basically what we say that when we are exposed to an infection, the body then makes its own antibodies, its own T lymphocytes and the other cells to fight the diseases. That is what we term as the acquired immunity, and that is very, very important for a person. If that immunity remains a little weak, then the ability to fight with the infection goes down. And then you must have seen people, there are various people who are very, very prone to catching infection. Even a slight change in the weather, slight change in the temperature, and the person falls sick, starts sneezing, starts coughing, and that is where we term the person having a low level of immunity. On the other hand, people with a higher level of acquired immunity, they are able to easily sail through such minor changes in the weather and the environment.
Okay. So how do these relate to diet as such? So if one looks at the components of, so to speak, good diet, such as carbohydrates, fiber, protein, fats, vitamins, etc., is there some kind of a pecking order in which immunity is more important in the case of some nutrients, and what comes before in importance, and so on and so forth?
Very well asked question. Immunity, when we talk about it in terms of diet, as I said, that a person acquires immunity through the ages, through the years of growth and through the adulthood. It basically has its one of the pillars standing on the diet as well. An adequate diet, a good diet, a healthy diet, a diet which is complete in terms of all the nutrients that you said, carbohydrates, fats, proteins, the micronutrients, basically making the pillars of a healthy human body. So this
Okay.
kind of diet will definitely lead to a healthier body, and a healthier body in turn is able to fight the infections better. Whenever we are a little sick, we become all the more prone to incoming infections. So that is where the body becomes weak. But if the foundation, the basic infrastructure within our body, that is strong, then all these minor infections, they just come, and the person is able to fight with them, overcome them, and it doesn't really harm so much. I advocate a healthy diet which is rich in carbohydrate, protein, fats, and all the micronutrients. And now since the COVID times, we've been, as I said, we've been hearing about immunity. So immunity boosting nutrients, luckily in India, we have got, our diets are so well framed, so enriching, so rich in terms of the variety and in terms of the food products that we use, that we are on the luckier side of the globe. The variety in spices, the variety in the fruits and the vegetables that we have in India, the variety in terms of the cooking methods, and the inclusion of spices like turmeric, garlic, and ginger, Vitamin C is a part of all of our diets, whether or not we realize it or not. So all these things make our diet very, very holistic. So that
Yes.
way we do not really need to worry. Turmeric is such an important ingredient of almost 99% of our foods, wherein this is an alien term for the Westerners. Ghee, which gives us the essential saturated fats for a body and is very important when we talk about vitamin D. So ghee is an alien term when it comes to Americans. But here
So,
in India, almost every household, we are into the practice of making ghee on our own.
right.
So that is where we are very lucky. And so such kind of a complete diet, a complete plate, if I talk about it, that is what makes that makes up for all the essential nutrients that we need for building our immunity.
So what is
So
this
any
plate that you're talking about?
a plate is basically the meal plate, the main meals that we have in our Indian diet. ICMR, Indian Council of Medical Research, has given the guidelines for the amount of macronutrients, the amount of food groups. Okay, let me put it in a simple language for all of you. The two dimensions of looking at the food. The one dimension is looking in on it in terms of the nutrients. When we say carbohydrate, when we say proteins, fats, these are the macronutrients which form the part of a diet. And then there are micronutrients, the vitamins and the minerals, they form the micronutrients. So this is one perspective of looking at the food that we eat. There's another perspective which takes into account the food groups. So food groups are something, I would equate it with the example of a rainbow. A rainbow comprises of 7 colors. So similar on the same lines, a complete meal plate has to have foods from the 7 food groups. Let me put it like that. A rainbow is incomplete if you eliminate any of the colors out of it.
Right.
Now on the same lines, if you eliminate any of the food groups out of your diet, for example, the main food groups are cereals, number 1, pulses, number 2, milk and milk products, number 3, and after that, fruits, vegetables, and non-vegetarian, they have their non-veg in their diet, and fats and oils.
I see.
So that
Okay.
makes it all 7 in, and all these 7 components in a plate make it complete. And the 7th component is nuts and oil seeds. So the ICMR has given guidelines that all of these products should form a part of a healthy meal plate, which is to be intaken by any person. If any of the component is missing, that means any of the colors of the rainbow is missing. So your rainbow will not be complete.
Very interesting. So this is interesting for another reason too. You brought up this point, which I think merits further reiteration, that the Indian diet or the Indian meal as such, the food we take in any part of the country, is intrinsically good.
Right.
Is that what I heard you say?
Yes. If we are including all the macronutrients, if we are including all the micronutrients, if we are including all the foods from all of these food groups that I have mentioned, the diet becomes ample, the diet becomes adequate, the diet becomes complete. But if any of these items is not taken as per the guidelines in the percentages which are prescribed, or any of the component is given a little higher or a lower percentage than what is actually required in the diet, it gives rise to an imbalance. So that is where the things get a little compromised. Otherwise, a complete meal plate with all the components in it will definitely make any person well enough to fight with the minor infections and the minor diseases.
Okay.
And
so
maintain a healthy outlook. Yeah.
Sure. So let's do a deep dive now. When we talk about all the major categories of food that we need a balance on, obviously protein, fat, carbohydrates.
Right.
can you put some numbers around it? I mean, how does a person feel that he or she is actually eating well in terms of any of those categories?
Yes. Okay. As per the, I'll go by all the scientific evidence and all the scientific data, so that it is easy for all of us to understand, and it is easy for all of us to prepare our meal plate. As per ICMR, 50% of our intake should come from the fruits and the vegetables. Okay, let me put it in another simpler form. When we analyze a person's diet, we look at either the main meal, any one of the main meals of a day, or we look at the intake over the entire 24 hours of a period. So that is termed as 1 day's diet recall. So the simplest method to understand whether a person has eaten all the essential things, at the end of the day, just sit down for 2 minutes, just do a self analysis, just recall whatever a person had in the diet since the morning. So a person can check whether I had cereals in my diet, whether I had fruits in my diet, whether I had pulses, whether I had fruits, whether I had vegetables, whether I had a spoon or two of nuts and oil seeds, and milk products, and non-veg for the non-vegetarians. So that makes it, that makes a person realize, okay, I had this, this was missing, so I can probably make up for it the coming day. Now, percentages, if I say, the calculations will become a little cumbersome for a person who does not know actually how many grams of which nutrient in the meal plate. So easiest method to do is to have 3 to 4 servings of vegetables, 2 servings of pulses, and 2 servings of pulses. So 2 servings means 2 katoris. And fruits and vegetables, you can include both the cooked and the raw form. So the salad and your cooked vegetables, both of it come in it. So 1 to 2 servings of fruit, just because we want to keep the sugar levels a little in control, so not too much of a sugary fruit for that matter. And then 1 to 2 spoons, rather a handful of oil seeds and nuts. That's easier said. And
so a serving in your definition is a katori.
A serving for pulses, for cereals, is katori. That is how.
A katori being a small cup.
A small cup. A katori means a small cup. So 150 ml is the standard size, 150 ml to 200, and we fill it not up to the brim, but 3/4. So that is a general. I mean, this is something which every household uses.
Okay.
So that's the best way to measure anything. And then we come to milk and milk products. So about 200, 250 to 300. Again, all of these values vary from person to person. I'm giving all these data with reference to a reference male or a reference female who are healthy.
An adult.
An adult. Yes.
And how does one proportionately scale down to a child or a senior citizen?
No. For senior citizens, again, the values differ, and for the children, the guidelines are different. The children need more of protein, whereas we adults do not need more of protein. Children need protein for their growth and repair and maintenance. We, as adults, we require protein only for the maintenance of our wear and tear of our tissues. We do not require any protein for the growth. So the guidelines differ for all the age groups, for all the even in the adults. We have to look at a lot of things when we do this analysis. There is no set pattern. For example, person A comes to me and tells me, okay, what is going to be the diet for me? I need to analyze a lot of things. I need to analyze the height, the weight, the health target of the person, the amount of activity, the lifestyle, basically sedentary or active lifestyle, whether the person is doing exercise, whether the person is into sports. So based on all of these conditions altogether, that is how we devise a plan. But for general healthy adult who's into a sedentary or a moderately active lifestyle, 2 to 3 servings of vegetables, 2 to 3 servings of pulses, 3 to 4 servings of vegetables, 1 to 2 servings of fruits, about 200 to 250 ml of milk and milk products, and then cereals and rest of the things. So the person should include each and everything into some amounts in the diet.
Okay. Monica, you will be sharing the details of this after the thing to those who require it, right? Because it's
Yes,
easy to
yes,
forget
yes,
these
yes, yes,
things.
yes, 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 yes.
Okay. So if it is so easy to understand what a good diet is, why do we keep hearing about all kinds of really weird diets that come out in the media every single time? Unconventional
Right.
diets. Just want.
Unconventional diets. Very interesting question, and are very useful, I guess, for all the participants to hear about this. There are a lot of fad diets in vogue. You keep hearing about some kind of diet here and there. It started with Atkins, and then moved on to Mediterranean diet, and then it moved on to zone diet, wherein the macros were given percentages, and then there were diets like paleo, then gluten free, then you have a dairy free, then vegan diet, and I'm sure you all have heard of all these names that you come across. And Jay, what happens, it depends upon the health target.
Mhm.
Now here generally the people look at the weight, the weighing scale, as a single parameter of assessing their health.
Okay.
Unfortunately, this is not a very practical way of doing it. We I mean in a house, in a house or a domestic setting, when an expert is not there to assess a case in complete, the weight becomes the only measure for a person to assess whether I'm healthy or not.
Mhm.
Whereas the complete analysis, if not possible for a person, then a person has to look at the weight, and then the target weight, and then the waist circumference,
Mhm.
which is easy to measure at home, and then waist and the hip ratio, which is again easy to measure and calculate.
Okay.
And then a person can calculate BMI. BMI is body mass index, which can be calculated by dividing your weight in kgs by height in meter squares.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
that gives you a value, and that value will let a person know in which bracket does a person fall. And
Mhm.
in accordance to that, a person can align the health targets and then look at what should be done. Now all
Mhm.
of these fat diets have they might have been developed based on certain requirements, but then people do not really look at why they were required. They just start doing it for an immediate benefit, for that matter.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
looking at some rapid weight loss, a detox diet, the most common word I ever come across. All the people who come to me, please give me a detox diet, I want to detox my body. So
Mhm.
all of these things do not really work in the long run.
I see.
So when we talk about a healthy human body, when a target is health, we cannot be doing all of these diets without realizing whether do they align with the health targets, which are my targets.
Mhm.
So one
Mhm.
has to actually know why, one has to actually know one has to actually know what is the exact procedure to do that, and whether will that lead to a sustainable result, and whether all those dietary practices that a particular diet gives, whether those practices are possible to be followed for the rest of the life.
Mhm.
So all these things one needs to analyze. If
Makes
the answer
sense.
is yes to all these questions, go ahead, do it.
Right.
But if there is one single no in between, one has to stop over there and reiterate the fact that we are looking at a healthy body. Specifically when we look at the case, I mean such a case of COVID which has happened in the I guess people were not anticipating.
Mhm.
And once
Mhm.
this has come into picture, now everybody started running after immunity building foods, and people have been overdoing it
Mhm.
without realizing that even excess of turmeric can lead to blood thinning. So people
Yeah.
started
Yeah.
consuming turmeric on everyday basis, which was not good. In the long run, it leads to blood thinning and then to your CVD,
Mhm.
cardiovascular
Mhm.
disorders.
Very interesting. A quick FYI to all our listeners. Monica has mentioned BMI, which is often used in these things as a basically as a basic vital. BMI stands for body mass index. And she gave you a formula. You don't actually have to remember the formula. There are tools. If you go to your Chrome browser or any browser you use and type for BMI calculator, a calculator will pop up, and you just have to enter the number, the height and the weight, and it'll give you the BMI ratio. And then you can look up to see whether your BMI is on the right range or not. Correct, Monica?
Yes, it is correct, but here there is a catch.
Yes.
You need to check. You need to check whether the number that you get at the end, what is the number? Because the cutoff given by the World Health Organization for the Asians are different, and for the Americans and other ethnicities, they are different. Asians, due to their ethnicity, they have a higher BMI. I mean, they tend to be more on the heavier side.
Okay.
When it comes to the body weight. So the guidelines for a healthy BMI are a little stringent.
Okay.
So the values, I guess from 18 to 23 means a healthy BMI. Okay. Anything lesser means undernourished, and anything over means overweight and obese and other categories. So just remember 18 to 23. These are the guidelines for 18 to 23. Your number should fall anywhere in between. These are the guidelines for the Asians, for the Indians specifically. And for Americans, the guidelines are 18 to 24, 24.5. So there we have to be a little careful.
So there you go. 18 to 23, very simple to remember. After you pop the numbers into your BMI calculator, which you can source on the browser, pop in your height and weight. And if it is between 18 and 23, Monica here says, as an Indian, we are okay. If it falls below 18, we have chance of being undernourished. And if it's over 23, then indications of obesity, correct?
Yes.
Okay,
perfect.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. And for those of you who actually require these numbers so that you can have it as a ready reckoner, Monica is more than happy to send you those. Please send your request to Megu, and we'll make sure that we get it across to each of you. Okay, so we have talked about diet now.
Right.
Now there's one kind of diet that seems to be popping up every now and then in the media, and that's a keto diet. I've never understood, and you used the right word. You said it's a fad. All these are fads. I've never really understood the fad behind the keto diet, and what it is supposed to do or who it is directed at. Spend 30 seconds on explaining that, please.
Yes. Keto diet was developed in the years 1920s.
Wow.
And I'll tell you, most of these diets are not fad for that matter. These were developed for certain specific purposes.
Okay.
But when a certain thing which has been developed for a given purpose is being misused for some other purpose, so that is where it becomes a fad. So keto diet was scientifically developed for the patients of epilepsy. And there is a complete body of literature available in the journals that it did really help the patients of seizures. And many of the patients were, all those patients who were not able to benefit from the medications, they did benefit from the keto diet. So this is the background of the keto diet. So keto diet is basically, when we talk about the diet, the framework of it, it is basically a high fat, moderate protein, and a low carb diet. The science behind
high
fat, moderate protein, and a low carbohydrate. Whereas it is famous as a high fat, high protein diet. No, it is not a high protein diet. It is a high fat, moderate protein, and a low carbohydrate. And there is a reason behind it. Our body basically gets energy from the glucose metabolism. All that food that we eat, it gets converted into glucose, and that glucose gives us the energy required for all our metabolic functions. Now keto dwells on another mechanism, which is which actually derives the energy from the burning of the fats in the body. So it is not the glucose metabolism, but the fat metabolism which is the basis of the keto diet. Now, the keto diet guidelines basically are that for the 3 days, one has to starve or be on a liquid or a very, very low calorie diet so that the body shifts its mechanism from the glucose metabolism to fat metabolism. And thereafter, gradually, the fat percentage in the body, in the food is increased. The protein as per the weight of the person, and then the carbohydrates are reduced as much as 20 grams per day or 20 grams per meal. But again, I would say the question one should ask oneself is, what is the target? Keto diet has helped a lot of people in reducing the weight, yes, but the scientific evidence, whether this is sustainable, whether this is healthy, whether this can be followed for a lifetime, there isn't enough evidence. There haven't been enough clinical researches, there isn't much evidence available which would advocate the fact that okay, keto diet can be adopted by people for different health targets apart from epilepsy. For epilepsy, it is proven. So for that matter, I would again tell all those people who want to go in for a keto diet to ask themselves whether does it suit their lifestyle and whether they'll be able to do it till a long time, because shifting the basic mechanism, the basic metabolism from glucose metabolism, glucose burning to a fat burning is you're shifting the entire system onto a different platform. So that is where the keto comes in. Keto has been found to be useful for diabetics. But so, again, whether will they be able to follow? And if it is to be done, it has to be done under the supervision of an expert, of a trained, even for epilepsy patients, they are under strict supervision of the dietitians. So the blood parameters, the lipid profiles, because high fat can lead to derangement of the lipids in the body. There can be cholesterol and triglycerides derangement. So that has to be under the scanner all the time.
So the two takeaways that I get from this short discussion on diets in general, keto diet in specific, is that number one, you have to know whether it is for a specific purpose that a particular diet is being advocated. We have to be cautious about that. And secondly, diets generally, the sustainability question is something that one has to keep in mind.
Exactly.
Whether it can actually deliver the goods, so to speak, in the long run.
Exactly. For example, the detox diet that we talked about, what is a detox diet? Basically, people understand that the term detox means getting rid of all the toxins.
Right.
But I find it very hilarious at times. This human body that has been created is such a wonderful machine. This has got inbuilt systems for every function. Whatever we eat, it gets digested. All the nutrients, they get broken down by the different digestive juices that our body produces, the bile, the HCl and everything. And then those nutrients, they reach their specific site and then they are absorbed, and then the entire mechanism runs on its own. Even if we do not eat the entire day and we keep sitting at one place, all still, totally still, the body does its own function. So when people come and ask me, what do I do to do a detox for my body? I just tell them one simple thing, and that is to have a very good liver. Because liver in the body is one which helps for the breakdown of your fats, and it gets the kidneys, that helps you get rid of all the toxins. Our body cannot retain toxins in itself. So the toxins, if retained by the body, will lead to any kind of diseases. So if you feel you are healthy, you do not need a detox. Have a very good liver, have a very good metabolism, and you're through. There is an inbuilt system. There's nothing that you can do from outside to detox your body as such, except like our elders used to do, a one-day fasting or a one-day diet on very light foods, for example, only fruits, or maybe one meal a day. So that is to give rest to your body and to give rest to your system.
As a nutritionist, would you advocate that for everybody?
Yes, but looking at the health targets, looking at the clinical condition, A diabetic person, I would not ask that person to go on for a fasting, even for a one single meal.
No, I
So it
meant a
differs from a
normal
person to
average
person.
adult.
A normal healthy human being can do a fasting once a month is good enough,
I see.
but it should not be a zero food thing unless and until your targets are clear, and definitely not without water.
Okay.
So it can be a lot of water intake, maybe it can be a lot of liquid intake, it can be a lot of fruits intake, it can be a lot of raw vegetables intake. So for that matter, you are intaking less of complex foods which your body needs to digest, so you're giving your system a little break in terms of things like a lot of rich foods that one eats, a lot of fats one eats. So it's like a break you give to your system. So be on a lighter, easy to digest food for about a day, and then from the next day onwards resume to that healthy meal plate that we discussed about.
So you mentioned water. How much water?
Yeah. Okay, very important question. That I'm so glad that you brought this up. Water comes to us from a lot of sources. When we count water as how much water, like you asked me, how much water one should intake, people generally take into account that plain transparent liquid which we term as water. But we have to take into account the overall liquid intake for a given day.
Whatever
The
is
liquid
composed
comes
within food as well.
Yes. So there's an easy calculation for that. I'll tell you that. The water which comes from in the form of the liquid milk or the buttermilk or the juices or some shakes. So all of this is counted as liquid intake.
Okay.
Now, how much water again depends upon height, weight, BMI, the exercise, the activity level of a person, the weather conditions, whether the person is in a hot area or a climate like winters. Then sweat rate of a person. Some people rarely sweat a lot and some people do not sweat. So that is how where we analyze whether the person needs to intake extra amount of water and the electrolytes. And then whatever food that we ingest, uh, a very quick example I'll give you. 1 cup of cooked dal. Dal is a staple all over India, I know that. So I'll take up this example. So 1 cup or 1 katori of cooked dal has got 70% water.
Any type of dal?
Any type of dal has got 65 to 70% of water. So that when metabolized in our body will give out 65 to 70% of the water. So all the 3 main meals and the snacks that we intake give us on an average about 1 liter of water as a byproduct of metabolism. Okay. In addition to that, we can looking at all other things as neutral. Let's say the weather is neutral, the person is not sweating so much. The requirement for a healthy adult would be, a female or a male would be, at the most 1.5 to 2 liters.
In a day?
So in a day, so that makes it a total of 2.5 to 3 liters. So 1 liter from the food metabolism and 1.5 to 2 liters from your other liquid intakes. Anything extra that you take, you are just increasing the number of trips to the washroom. That's it.
So this exhortation that one reads about in any article you pick up, that you have to drink 3 to 4 bottles of water, is incorrect?
I would not comment on what others write, but I mean, what I have studied, that tells me that you're just increasing the number of trips to the washroom. And and okay, another very interesting thing comes up here in my mind. People say that drink hot water to lose weight. You also must have heard,
yes,
right?
We have heard that.
Yes. Have anyone ever tried mixing oil or fat in water? Can we do that? We cannot. Yeah. So how can one imagine that the body's fat will get dissolved by drinking warm water or a lot of water? We cannot dissolve fat into water, so we cannot look at fat loss. We cannot target fat loss by drinking more water.
Uh-huh. All right. Okay, good. So we have talked about nutrition, composition, we have talked about servings, we have talked about, to some extent, we have talked about guidelines for a normal person. Let's
Right.
dig a little deeper. India is unfortunately the so-called diabetes capital of the world. So we have a lot of diabetes people, diabetics. What are the guidelines for diabetics in terms of nutrition? That's my first question. My second question is, in terms of fruits and vegetables, could you shed some light on what are the fruits and vegetables that are actually good and what to avoid by diabetics? Hello, Monica?
I think there's a drop in her bandwidth, Jay.
Okay.
Yeah. Let's wait for her. Probably she'll just come back. That was a good question, Jay. I suppose the participants were waiting for that question because
I think there's a dramatic pause here before we give the answer.
exactly. So lots of diabetics here probably in this webinar too. So the vegetables which you eat, the vegetables you shouldn't eat, just like you said, there's so many articles out there,
Correct.
To do this, not do that, and vice versa. So it would be great to hear it from her. And I really like the fact that, don't drink that hot water to lose weight.
That was a good observation that some of these sayings which go around are not necessarily true.
Yeah. And add a dash of lime also. I'm not sure whether that will also work. The first thing in the morning.
Our apologies to all our viewers and listeners for this slight delay. I guess this is a dramatic point, and she wants to come back and make a dramatic point on that. So about diabetics in terms of diet and nutrition.
Yeah.
So we'll just wait a bit and so the reason I asked that question, and this is for people out there who are listening, in India currently, according to recorded evidence, there are approximately 75 million diabetics in the country. When I say recorded, these are people, adults mostly, and mostly type 2 diabetes, who have been diagnosed by a specialist as having a diabetic condition, and they are either on medication, they could be on insulin, things like that. This is 75 million. Now, I have been talking to a lot of experts over the last several years, and by a simple rule of thumb, if the number of recorded diabetics, given our large country size and difficulty in actually reaching out to people everywhere, is 75 million, the number of people who have an early stage of diabetics, pre-diabetics, is probably approximately at least 1.5 times, if not 2 times. So we are looking at really, really large numbers here. That is why I refer to India as the capital of diabetes, and it is not my description. If you look up the literature, you'll find that that is how India is described. Unfortunately, the numbers are large, and diabetes is a very, very complex disease, which leads to a whole lot of other complications like cardiovascular, kidney disease, liver disease, ophthalmic problems, eye problems, foot problems, nerve problems, and so on. So it has the capacity to actually incapacitate a person if not monitored either before the onset of diabetes, or after detection and its management. So for those of you listening here, I think this is a crucial thing for any questions that you might have for Monica in terms of diet and nutrition and the kinds of intake we need to incorporate in our daily diet, such as fruits and vegetables. Just a little observation there based on what little research I have done myself.
Yeah. Probably the participants can use this time to, type out the questions they might be having for Dr. Monica in the chat box. we can deal with that in the Q&A session. Very sorry to have this interruption. I'm sure there is a bandwidth issue, and Sandhya is dealing with that. I suppose she's in touch with her. Maybe she can log in from her phone if that is possible. Let's see. Yeah, why is diabetes increasing so much in India? Yes.
This has been, again, that's a good question, Meghu. Of course, we have an expert who can answer more to that. There are two parts to this question, really, from what I have gathered.
Okay.
One is, did diabetes exist prior, before we had the tools and the awareness and all that to say that it did not exist? We probably did not. In our grandparents' time, it probably existed. Unfortunately, they did not have the means to get themselves assessed. That's number one. The second thing, it is astonishing how different it is from how we lived 30, 40 years ago. There's a lot more intake of fast foods, a lot more, which has a lot of salt content and fat, a lot more processed foods in terms of packaged food that is available in the grocery stores. And when you go to a grocery store, you pick up not only the raw food, so to speak, but also the fully packaged things like, I don't want to name names, but we all know what they are. So all that has probably contributed as well. So which is why, and there is another debate that is ongoing, and research is being done, which also calls for a lot more research in India, which is, has it increased in the younger segments of the population, those who are below 30 years? There is anecdotal evidence that it has indeed increased dramatically in terms of people getting affected. And when I say anecdotally, we have seen ourselves. When I go to the mall, rarely, the number of obese children is astonishing to see, who are going around. I don't recall that many back 30 years ago. So probably the anecdotal evidence has a correlation with real facts when they come out.
Hi Jay, I'm back. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. There was an internet issue. It just went off, and I wasn't able to do it.
So we were giving in some fillers to that question that I popped at you,
so
which was, India is the diabetic capital of the world.
Yes,
there are 75 million recorded cases, and innumerable number of people who are not yet actually diagnosed as diabetics.
Yes.
So in the light of all that, what should people do in terms of food intake to avoid diabetes, and which are the best for diabetes, and which also are the ones to avoid for those who are already diabetic?
Right. There are 2 and 3 categories of people here. You must have discussed it in the meanwhile. People who are not diabetic, but they are prone to diabetes. Because for diabetes, the risk factors are genetic, obesity. So these are the risk factors. And then you have a higher waist circumference. And then you have sedentary lifestyle. So all of these are factors which are, risk factors for diabetes. So people who are not diabetic, but they've had a family history. So they are prone to diabetes. So they have to keep in their mind. Second category is of the people who are pre-diabetics.
Okay.
Who have the risk factors and who have their blood sugars in the pre-diabetic range. So normal human being has blood fasting glucose at 99, 100 or less, 99 or less. So for pre-diabetic, the fasting blood sugar is from 100 to 126. So this is the range. So all those people who fall in the pre-diabetic range have got, so this is category 2. And then there are people with full-blown diabetes. So these are the 3 categories. So lines for all these 3 people are more or less congruent, but a little different. I will talk about it in very, very general terms. for diabetics, the most common thing we hear is to go totally off sugars, no sugary products, no refined flours, and low fat content. I would put it in a little different way. I would suggest people to look at the glycemic index of the food. Glycemic index is measured by looking at the food product's reaction in the body. When we ingest a food, every food gets converted into glucose. So glucose is kept at a value of 100, and all other meals are rated in accordance with that. So different food products, they give a glucose spike in our blood at a different level. So depending on that, every food product has been labeled with a number which is called glycemic index. So the people with full-blown diabetics, they have to look at the glycemic index of the food. They
So
have to consume.
where can they get the glycemic index for daily intake kinds of foods?
They can just check on the Google.
Okay.
So but then they should know what is the range. So any food product with a value of 60 or lesser is a low glycemic food. Anything in the value of 60 to 80 is a moderate glycemic index for a food, and 80 plus is considered as high.
Could you give us examples of daily stuff that we all eat?
Daily stuff, all the fat products have got very low glycemic index. Your nuts and oil seeds have got low glycemic index. Butters and ghee and margarine, all of these are low glycemic index food. The chicken, eggs, fish, all these are low glycemic index foods. Now moderate category would be your whole grain cereals, pulses, whole pulses, and then there are fruits in that category. And the higher glycemic index food be your sugar, jaggery, honey, refined flours, cakes, bakery products, and all of this, ice creams, chocolates, so all of this. So these are the general guidelines. Look at the food which do not raise your blood sugar levels, do not give it an immediate spike, because the health target for diabetics is to maintain a steady level of blood glucose throughout the day. No peaks and troughs. No such kind of graphs. They have to have a steady, a little high and a little low. So the guidelines are: do not combine the fruits with the main meals. Have fruits as a midday snack. Do not have any of these sugary snacks or sugary foods. Earlier, fruits were considered to be high in, high on glycemic index, but now fruits are being looked at as packed of nutrients and fibers. So generally people say that, oh, I'm a diabetic, I cannot have mango. We, from the scientific angle, we look at the fruit and we say that yes, mangoes are allowed, but how much is the quantity that one can have, and what is the timing? The timing and the quantity matters. So a diabetic can have white rice. The glycemic index of white rice is 73. The glycemic index of whole wheat is 71, I guess. These are the figures somewhere around. So they're very close when you look at the amount of glucose spike they give to your blood. But generally people look at the white rice as a bad boy in the meal box, and
I was just
the
coming
wheat
to
as
that.
so the wheat becomes a good thing in the meal plate. But no, it is not that. And in addition to that, another thing, when we're looking at the meal plate, now this thing has come up, so we have to look at the total overall glucose load of the meal. You may have 4 or 5 moderate glycemic index foods, but then overall glucose load of the meal becomes a little higher. So you have to have a combination of low and a moderate glycemic index foods, and a lot of complex fibers, complex carbohydrates, and a good amount of fat. Fat helps the carbohydrates digest slowly. So that is where the time duration, for example, a meal which is devoid of fats will give you an immediate glucose spike, but whereas the meal which has 1 to 2 spoons of fat will digest over a period of 2 to 3 hours. So giving you a slow glucose release in the blood.
So slow metabolism with a higher glycemic index is is okay under
Lower
certain
glycemic index. Lower glycemic index.
lower glycemic index.
Lower glycemic index.
Okay.
Yes. So the diabetics have to have, again, carbohydrates, some 55 to 60%. For a healthy human being, the range is 60 to 65%.
So when you talk in terms of your meal plate, which in the Indian context, let's call it a thali. We
Yes.
all have a thali of lunch
Yes.
or dinner or whatever. Is there a composite or a total glycemic index of a typical thali that one can calculate?
No, we cannot do that. I mean, a normal person would not be able to do that.
Okay.
It
Okay.
involves complex calculations, but the only thing I mean, by experience, we know that which are sweet foods or which foods have a higher sweetness index, and which foods do not have. So looking at that, people can generally make an idea about. The best thing is not to have fruits with your main meals, not to have any sugary products, and even if you want to have a bite or two, have it as a midday snack.
Okay.
To avoid that 4 a.m. And have small regular meals throughout the day. It should not be one full plate and then a gap of 5 to 6 hours and then again a one full plate. So have smaller frequent meals throughout the day so that the glucose levels, they again remain steady.
Got it.
So
Since
the
you mentioned
percentage
sugar, since you mentioned sugar, now in India, typically the sugar of choice for most of us in most households, the average household, is white sugar. But we also have jaggery coming from our ancient practices. We also have new types of sugars, beet sugar, which is not very popular in India, but is coming to the fore. And then there are probably other sugars.
Coconut sugar, honey.
Right? Honey is one.
Honey is one.
Comment a little bit on those in terms of glycemic index and what is
I'll add on products to this. Date syrup, raisins, and what you have, all the jaggery products. So all of these are high sugar products. I have heard people say that, oh, I am diabetic, I cannot have white sugar, but I can have jaggery. No, all of these sweet products are very, very high in glycemic index. So one should refrain from having very high quantities of this. One can have a spoon or a half, but again, not with the main meal. Has to be timed according to the meals throughout the day.
Got it. Got it.
Yeah.
We have been talking about sugar and we've been talking about diabetes thus far. I want to shift gears slightly at this point. Let's go to cardiovascular disorders. Now, when we talk about cardiac disorders or heart problems, the focus of attention shifts away from sugar to things like salt and fat.
Yes.
Right. Give us some guidelines about under what situations one has to be a little cautious and how much of fat and how much of salt can a person have, starting from the normal person to one who is tending towards something a little more problematic.
Right. Here, I would not categorize the people, because guidelines for a healthy human being and people with cardiovascular diseases are almost very, very similar. Reason being, most of us follow a sedentary lifestyle. We do not have much exercise into our daily lives. The guidelines would be different for the people who are into rigorous or very active life, but for most of us who are into a sedentary life, who are not doing exercises, the guidelines would be to reduce the fat intake to about, let's say, again, I would not talk about it in percentages, becomes difficult for people to interpret. I would say for a healthy adult human being, fat is again of two types: the visible fat and the invisible fat. The invisible fat comes from the oil seeds, the nuts, and the visible fat is the ghee, the oil that we use for cooking. So that is what we can visually count. Now here the count means 1 teaspoon is equal to 5 ml. And for a healthy adult, 3 to 4 teaspoon of visible fat is good, should be added to the diet. And overall, if we calculate it in grams, that would be 15 to 20 grams or ml of fat which is visible, and 5 to 10 ml of invisible fat. That's for a healthy human being. Now, for the people who have cardiovascular diseases, the guidelines are almost similar, but the kind of fat differs. The kind of fat, in the sense, people with such conditions should move on more towards unsaturated fatty acids.
And what are these?
These are okay. I'll give a little more detail about this. The fat is of 2-3 categories. Saturated fatty acids, for example, coconut oil, or ghee that we use in our kitchen. So these are the saturated fatty acids, which scientifically have been proven to aggravate the cardiovascular diseases. So these should be reduced, and one should not have more than 1 spoon of it. Let's come down to basic the measurements that you and me understand.
In a day or in a meal?
In a day. Whatever I talk about is throughout the span of a 24 hours. So, and unsaturated fatty acids are again of 2 types: the monounsaturated fatty acids and polyunsaturated fatty acids. Now, polyunsaturated fatty acids again get divided into omega-6 and omega-3. Now, this is again sounding a little cumbersome. I'll make it easier for everybody. Just keep rotating the kind of oils that you use in your kitchen, and keep in mind your 3 to 4 teaspoon of limit per person. Because if you keep rotating, you will get benefits of the different nutrients that come from different kinds of oils. Do not stick to one brand. Do not stick to one kind. You can have ghee and coconut oil as one of your source of saturated fatty acids. For unsaturated fatty acids, one can move on to groundnut oil, soybean oil, rice bran oil, sesame seeds oil. So groundnut, sesame and rice bran, they make up for monounsaturated fatty acids. And then in addition to that, sunflower oil, mustard oil, and safflower oil, soybean oil. All these are omega-6 and omega-3, that is polyunsaturated fatty acids. So just keep rotating. That's the easiest thing to do. You do not have to keep in your mind which one did I eat and which one did I not, how much. So do not get into calculations. Leave it for us dietitians to do all this at our end. Keep a mix of all this. For people with cardiac disease, they have to have more of unsaturated fatty acids and less of saturated, and salt. Here, salt has to be in less quantities for people with cardiovascular diseases. The maximum permissible limit as given by the WHO, the World Health Organization, for a person, the sodium intake is 2300 milligrams. Now, again, difficult for a person to calculate how much milligram and how much in grams. So how do I calculate my salt intake? 1 teaspoon of salt intake is the maximum limit for a healthy human being over a period of 24 hours.
So I want to put it to you a little practically here, because I'm an amateur cook, and I have the habit of I've learned this from my mother, of gradually learning how to pop salt into whatever you're cooking in an andaz kind of fashion, approximate. Okay.
Right.
I know how much to put, and it usually 90% of the time turns out right. And that is how I think most people cook. They don't go around with a measuring spoon. They andaz say they pop a teaspoon into a pot of whatever broth they are making. Right. Rasam in the south and dal in the north, whatever it is. So we have a teaspoon or a teaspoon and a half of salt going into this broth, which can feed 4 people. Are we within limits on a per person basis?
Now, this reminds me of a recent research which was done by the George Institute in Delhi. The average salt intake of an average Indian is 10 grams, whereas the guidelines is somewhere less than 5 grams, 3 to 4 grams is the upper limit. So on an average, people intake 10 grams, which is equal to 2 teaspoons. Wow. Do not get into calculations. Do your cooking andaz se, as you have been doing all your life. Do not stress over the salt thing. I'll tell you a few very, very simple things to follow. Remove the table salt. remove the table salt from the table, consume pickles occasionally, moderate. Again, moderation is the key. Consume them very, very occasionally. Try to minimize papad in your diet. Try to minimize cooked foods in your diet, the Lay's chips, the potato chips, and these whatever comes from the market will definitely be laden with salt. The cakes that we buy from the bakery have got salt in it. Salt aids the action of soda bicarbonate and the baking soda while the baking is being done. So even a sugary product that you're buying from the market has got enough amount of salt for. And then there are vegetables like amaranth. Amaranth is a very sodium rich vegetable. So you would not be able to calculate how much sodium comes from where, how much salt am I putting in my diet. So just eliminate high salt foods, go off the processed foods, cook as much as possible at home, no packaged foods, no ready-made masalas for that matter, and table salt totally out of your table. So following these things, you will be able to considerably reduce the amount of salt in your diet. Another way could be you buy a packet of salt, you mark the date on it, you consume it over a number of days. And nowadays people are not ordering in much from outside. So, you can calculate the number of meals that you've had and the number of people. When that 1 kg of packet of salt is consumed, you divide it by the number of days, number of meals, and the number of people. You will get an average quantity of salt a person is consuming.
Interesting. That's a very good idea. Different types of salt. In the market, you get white salt, which is iodized. And then you have Himalayan salt, you get rock salt from Rajasthan. Any difference between all of those other than the iodine that has been put in?
The white salt is iodized. Yeah, sorry. The white salt is iodized, and that has been done for a reason. So never ever eliminate white salt out of your diet completely, because iodine does not come to us from any other food source except salt. So that has to be there in the diet. Now, when it comes to other salts, rock salt, Himalayan pink salt, the other kind of salts, they are the crude form of salts that are available. And they have a lower sodium content and a higher potassium content. That reminds me of the Lona salt that is available in the market. People think that Lona, Lona. So basically, the brands claim that the salt is low in sodium content, whereas the fact is the same salt is higher in potassium content. So the taste remains the same, and the basic the ingredients differ. So that is where you have to be cautious about. If you're taking less of sodium and more of potassium, then there will an electrolyte. You have to look at what the electrolyte composition of your food is going to be. So those salts are good. Again, these Himalayan pink salt, the sea salt, the rock salt, they are rich in calcium and certain other minerals which are good for the body, but they cannot become a staple in the house unless and until there is some clinical condition that we need to look at. So keep it a mix. Keep it a mix. Yeah.
So Monica, we are nearing the end of our the time we have for our session before we open it up to Q&As, and I can see that a lot of people are popping questions at us. But before we go to the Q&A, I want to sort of give this conclusion to what we have been discussing thus far. We started with diet, nutrition, what are the compositions, what are the numbers involved, how do we eat appropriately in terms of the meal plate. Then we moved to disorders such as diabetes, then we moved to cardiovascular. And now we are a little clearer about where we are heading. And all of these actually pertain to something that is now being described as lifestyle. Lifestyle, and many of the disorders that we have talked about, the two we have talked about, are basically lifestyle disorders. Could you give us your sense of the causes of lifestyle disorders and the risk factors and tie them back to our core topic, which is nutrition?
Yes, yes, yes. Very precisely put by you. Lifestyle disorder is one pandemic that the entire world is fighting.
Mm-hmm.
And it is more dangerous than what we are fighting on the face of it, than COVID. So, just briefly, I'll put it forward. Diabetes, type 2 diabetes,
Okay.
cardiovascular diseases, a few kind of cancers, obesity, all of these are called lifestyle disorders. And now there is one new term which has emerged, which is called a metabolic syndrome. Now,
What is that?
the medical fraternity has been focusing at the prevention rather than treatment, because prevention is always easier than the management of a given disease. Now, doctors per se have been focusing at the metabolic syndrome, which is a cluster of symptoms.
Mm-hmm.
And when one diagnosed with this cluster of 5 symptoms, it becomes easier for a doctor to diagnose where the person's health is heading towards, so that earlier prevention can be done, the primary prevention that we call it, and the management becomes easier. And these 5 symptoms are higher weight, obesity, for example, and higher waist circumference. Number 3 is high BP. Number 4 is higher fasting blood glucose levels. And number 5 is lower HDL levels.
Do they all come together?
Off and on, yes. The beginning of these lifestyle disorders, it can be recognized by looking at all these 5 parameters. So a person may have 3 out of these 5 conditions. So the person will be labeled as having a metabolic syndrome, the syndrome X it is called. So therein we have to put in the the instructions for altering the lifestyle, so that it can be prevented well before. For example, we had discussed about the normal human beings, pre-diabetics and diabetics. It is easy to reverse the pre-diabetes to a normal healthy state, rather than from a full-blown diabetes to a pre-diabetes or a normal healthy state. So when we look at metabolic syndrome, this is a very good thing that the medical fraternity has done, that we can look at these parameters and reverse them before they get converted into something which needs to be managed instead of being reversed.
So a metabolic syndrome, how do they correlate to an actual disorder such as cardiac or diabetes?
But the HDL levels, the LDL levels, the blood pressures, all these 3 factors, they give indications about the cardiac disorders, the progress towards the cardiac disorders. The fasting blood glucose levels give an indication where the person is moving to in terms of the blood glucose levels, the diabetes, the type 2 diabetes, and the weight and the waist circumference. Definitely obesity is something which gives rise to a lot of these issues. So this is what we need to look at.
So it's fair to say that the metabolic syndrome are basically indicators or warning signs towards.
They are a cluster of indicators. Yes.
Okay.
They're a cluster of symptoms.
Okay. I have let's go to the Q&A session now. I've got a list of questions here, and then Meghu could perhaps weigh in with those
I'll just take 1 minute. I'll just take 1 minute before you move on to question answer session.
Please.
And I want everyone to know what all to check. I mean, these are, for example, there are 5 indicators for metabolic syndrome to be identified. There are few things what you and me can do at our home to judge our own healthiness. How do we do that? Except for weight and height, what else do we have? The obesity parameters are, again, I would reiterate whatever I said in the beginning: the waist circumference, the hip circumference, the waist and hip ratio. And all those who need the information, they can send in their email IDs, and Meghalai, she can coordinate with me and I can send the details to them. What are the parameters? What are the guidelines? How to judge? In addition to that, look for the hidden signals. Look for the frequent headaches that you get. Look for the stress levels that one is facing. If the stress levels are higher, there is a complete body of literature being written on the gut brain axis. The levels of stress in our mind, they directly affect the microflora in our gut, and then in turn the digestion, and in turn the absorption of nutrients, and thus leading to a host of diseases that a person catches. So that is one. And the physical exercise. 30 minutes of physical exercise per day is very, very important, whether in-house or outside. And excess of everything is bad. Do not go beyond 150 minutes per day, because excess of exercise again raises the cortisol levels in our body. Cortisol is a hormone, which rises in response to very heavy rigorous exercises if done beyond 150 minutes, and higher cortisol levels lead to fat deposition in our body. So an excess of exercise can do bad to you instead of doing good. So be cautious of all these factors, and eat a healthy meal, eat a healthy diet, and do some exercise. Keep the stress off your mind for some time at least. Unwind yourself, and do some deep thinking, and leave all these calculations to us.
All right.
Just eat a healthy and happy meal.
Awesome,
now
Monica.
We can move on to question answer.
All right. Yeah. So Monica, I have some questions here, and then once we have cycled through them, Sandhya will be bringing up the questions that have come to her real time while you were talking. So my first question is, what is native food? Can you describe that and the pros and cons of having native food?
Native food is something which is grown locally and which becomes a part of the traditional diet. Simple example would be wheat in the north of India, rice in the south of India, coffee in the north of India, tea in the eastern part of India. Coffee in the southern India and tea in the northeastern or northern part of India. So these are all native foods which become a part of the traditional diet. So these are native foods which should be taken into account.
Okay. We have talked about milk. We have talked about water. What is a healthy weight? We have dwelt on that. How to adjust. One question here is how to adjust your meals for exercise. So just like you mentioned, when to take fruits vis-a-vis the meals.
Very nice question. Meal for exercise. Here I would take your permission to rephrase the question, and I would say it like how to organize your exercise around your meal times, because meals we are going to intake no matter what. We feel hungry and we ingest something, but exercise does not remain on the priority for many of us. So do not think that there is one particular time to exercise. Just take out 30 minutes any time of the day, but remember 3 hours after your main meal. There should be a gap of 3 hours after the main meal before you get into any exercise, and post exercise there has to be a gap of 15 to 20 minutes or maximum half an hour for you to intake a full meal.
Okay.
And again, it depends upon what kind of exercise you're doing. Have some nimbu pani or some coconut water, salted nimbu pani and coconut water as an electrolyte, as a source of electrolytes while you're doing exercises, so that your hydration levels are up. And after the rigorous exercise, pre and post, one should have a good source of carbohydrate in the pre-workout meal, and a good source of carb and protein combination post-workout. That is very, very important. But when you're waking up in the morning and doing an exercise right in the morning, just have a glass of water and maybe a handful of roasted chana is good enough. But never do an exercise all empty stomach. That is going to again put stress on your gut. So do not do that. But incorporate exercise somewhere within your schedule, either late night, either early morning, afternoon, wherever. So just adjust.
Got it. One last question from my side, and then I'll turn it over to Sandhya.
Yeah.
Vegetarian versus non-vegetarian diet. Are there significant differences? Are there any gaps that in one or the other that has that could be filled up with something else outside our normal dietary pattern?
Yes. Vegetarian diet is good enough, But for non-vegetarians, I would say the iron absorption becomes easier because iron from heme source of foods is easy to absorb. So for non-vegetarians, I would say that if they're not taking any non-vegetarian food, they should increase the amount of vitamin C intake in their foods, and they should incorporate more of iron-rich foods, and follow practices, for example, using iron pots, so that they get in more iron. Number two is vitamin B12. Vitamin B12 comes basically from the non-veg sources, but it also comes from milk.
Mhm.
So include a good amount of milk and milk products in your diet. It comes from milk, cheese, and then eggs. If you are okay to have eggs, do not miss the egg yolk,
Mhm.
because
Do
that
not
is
miss
where
the
the
egg yolk,
do not miss the egg yolk, because that is where the vitamin B12 lies.
because that is
So if
exactly
you are
what we have
having,
been told all along these many
that
years.
is to reduce the fat amount. Egg yolk is a fat rich food. Egg white is the pure protein. So to reduce the fat content of the diet, people generally forgo the yolk. So I suggest have one yolk at least. If you're having one egg, have it full. If you're having two eggs, have at least one yolk.
I see.
Specifically, if you're not on a non-vegetarian diet, and then whole pulses, whole grains, all of these give you vitamin B12. So do not worry about it. Generally, we have seen a surge in the cases of vitamin D deficiency and vitamin B12 deficiency. But over and all, if you are eating healthy meals, you are through. Vitamin D, here I would bring it up. Vitamin D is a fat soluble vitamin, so get plenty of sunshine, and milk and milk products. Try not to eliminate milk from your diet, because for
Okay.
vegetarians, milk becomes very, very important.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So over to you, Sandhya. I believe you have more questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Jay. Thank you, Monica. The audience has many questions. So Bridge wants your comment on this, that one keeps reading that WHO of late
Mhm.
has lowered the sugar levels. That is, the parameters for
Right.
the glucose. So that can be considered as a normal range. This makes the number of diabetics consequently becomes larger.
Right.
So do you have any comments on that?
I would say that if your morning blood sugars are, if you're a diabetic, for example, we are talking about diabetics here, right? So any diabetic with the morning blood sugars in the range of 100 to 150 and is not facing any contraindications is good enough to go. Contraindications, in the sense, I would explain it here: no lethargy, no weakness, you're feeling fully active throughout the day, you're having all your meals at the time, and keep monitoring your postprandial glucose levels as well. And very importantly, monitor your HbA1c levels every quarter.
But these
that makes
levels,
that makes sense, because any levels below 6 are very, very favorable, but even if you are under 7, you are good to go. You do not need to worry much about your morning fasting blood glucose levels.
okay.
There is one way to reduce morning fasting levels, are that have a late night small meal just before you sleep,
Oh, that's
because
interesting.
a prolonged period of no food, for example, a person is having a dinner at 8 and then a breakfast at 8 or 8:30, means a 12 hours of no meal. So that is when our body starts releasing its own glucose from the liver and the muscles.
Okay.
And that is when we see the cases of 4 a.m. Glucose spike or early morning glucose spike. So I would suggest again a glass of milk at the bedtime. That will help reducing the morning blood sugar levels. And then HbA1c one has to monitor.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
So someone's asking, can we manage diabetes with just diet and exercise without medication?
Depends upon at what level you are and how old is your diabetes. If it is not a very old thing, then you have to monitor again your HbA1c levels. But primarily for a diabetic, the management resides on 3 pillars: diet, medication, and exercise. You cannot just eliminate any one of this and think of that, okay, 2 pillars are enough. So all 3 together will give you best results, but keep monitoring your levels, the fasting blood glucose levels, and how old your diabetes is, because diabetes is a progressive disease.
Right.
And sometimes the symptoms are not so evident.
Right.
Yeah, it may go unsymptomatic for a longer duration of time. So just keep your eyes on the figures and all the three pillars. Yes, be in touch with your physician, because if your blood glucose levels are in control, if your HbA1c is in control, the medications do reduce as well. And it is very important to follow a good diet regime,
Okay.
because diet plays a major role, as we discussed at length about the glycemic load, about the glycemic index, and the kind of foods, what should be eaten, what should not be. So keep everything into account. Just go to a good qualified dietitian. Take a one-time plan. You do not need to be on a regular plan. Just take a one-time plan. The person will give you do's and don'ts, the list of foods and the options that you can have for your breakfast, lunch and dinner, and the midday snacks, and you're good to go.
Okay.
Very good.
Thank you. So Anita says that there is this new thinking that one should have 1 spoon of coconut oil or ghee every day. As we have enough oils in our foods, is this to be followed? And what is the difference for vegetarians and non-vegetarians?
Vegetarians and non-vegetarians, I guess we've already discussed in detail. So here I would bring up the case of saturated fatty acids. I guess Miss Anita, when she's talking about coconut oil or ghee, she's referring to the saturated fatty acids. For a healthy human being, anyways, the guidelines, the ICMR guidelines say that 10% of our fats should come from saturated fatty acids. So a 5 ml in a day is good enough. Ghee is one of the traditional foods that we've been having in our diets, and now the West has also been vouching about it. So 5 ml a day, 5 ml of visible coconut oil or ghee in your diet will do wonders. In fact, the recent studies have given the evidence that coconut oil is very, very useful in cases wherein a person wants to reduce weight. But then again, this has to be taken into account, looking at the entire meal plan, the entire 1 day's calorie intake, carbs, proteins, and fats, and not just that you start having 1 spoon of coconut oil right in the morning. So that is good.
Okay,
That is
thank
good.
you. Rajashekhar and Jayanidhi, I think they have specific questions. So I would request that they contact you directly or write to Meghalay and she can connect the two of
Yes.
you. Yeah,
Yes.
because it is specific to senior citizens and for a person with CKD issue condition.
Sure.
Yeah, so Pon Muruga says that there are discussions in social media about we have covered this groundnut and coconut oil, whether they are good or not. Okay, more questions. Can we have fruits before bedtime? Andar asks that question.
Sandhya, 1 minute. I think that question is specific about groundnut and coconut oil.
Okay.
Whether groundnut and coconut can be had.
I can see that question here. There are
Sorry, groundnut and coconut, whether they are good or not.
Okay. Groundnut
Sorry,
oil is a good source of monounsaturated fatty acids.
No, sorry, Monica.
Yeah.
They're just asking about groundnut and coconut. I don't
Yes,
know.
yes. That's what I said.
Oils.
Groundnut oil and groundnut oil is a good source of monounsaturated fatty acids, and
Okay.
coconut oil is a saturated fatty acids. So when we say that we can have 10% of our fat requirement from saturated fatty acids, coconut oil is good to go. And now when we come to monounsaturated fatty acids, they have to be a part of our diet somehow, because scientifically they have been proven to help the people who are progressing towards cardiac disorders.
Monica, I think the question here relates not so much to the oil per se, but to having groundnut peanuts by itself. Like, we have moongfali, right?
Okay.
In that form, in the raw form.
In that form, I would say that the fat content of peanuts is very high. It is somewhere around 47-48%. So when you're looking at having peanuts in your daily diet, then you have to take into account the invisible fat content that you're consuming and the visible fat content that you're consuming.
Explain
so the overall, The groundnut, whatever peanuts a person is consuming, the amount of fat that comes from groundnut will be categorized under the category of invisible fats. And the visible fat that we are consuming in our food, that will come under the visible fat. Now, when I talk about the guidelines saying that a person can have 25 to 30 grams of total fat intake, so there we talk about the visible as well as the invisible fat. So a handful of peanuts are good. But in excess, again, for excess, we'll have to take into account how much grams did the person have and how much was the fat content. But up till the time a person is having a handful of peanuts, you're safe too. You're safe, and you do not need to go to any dietitian for calculation.
In the same vein, this is my question.
Yes.
As a supplement to what was asked, in the South, you drink one drinks coconut water. You get it in every street corner.
Right.
And once the coconut water has been drunk from the coconut, the person actually halves the coconut and gives you the insides. Okay, it's actually a delicious dish which we all enjoy.
Yes.
It's like eating mungfali. So can you comment on that? Is it the same logic?
Coconut, in the raw coconut that you're talking, the pani wala coconut, we basically look at it from the point of view of electrolytes. The southern of India faces a little higher temperature. I mean, when we compare it to the north of India, the temperatures are higher, and when people are outside of their home, it's a tropical temperatures. So therein, the electrolyte loss through the sweat is higher. So the nature, the universe has been created in such a way that what was required when and where has been placed there. So I find coconut has been placed at a very good location for the people, because sweat makes you lose potassium, and that is what you get from the coconut. And coconut water is not so rich in the fat content.
I see.
It is the coconut, and when you eat that inside thing that you're mentioning about, it is more watery. The water content of the entire thing is so high that the fat content becomes negligible.
I see.
Yeah. So that is healthy overall.
Thank you.
Anything else, Sandhya?
Yeah. So Andal Shamsundar wants to know, can we have fruits before bedtime?
Fruits before bedtime, what is a health target? Number one. For a healthy human being, I would suggest the best time to have fruits is an hour before the breakfast, maybe or half an hour before the breakfast, or as a midday snack, or if at all a person wants to have it, then half an hour before the meal times. At bedtime, the fruits would not give you same kind of nutrient absorption because your stomach is already full. And fruits are best absorbed when they're eaten on an empty stomach. So bedtime would not be really a good time for the fruits. Instead, go in for a cup of milk, which is a combination of carb, protein, and fat. And that will help your body sail through the entire night's time of no food intake.
Okay. Thanks. So Bridge wants to know, is it okay to go on a liquid diet like soups, shakes, juice once in a week, especially to help a sluggish gut?
Sluggish gut, I would say it is better to incorporate exercise to improve your metabolism. And when you are going on a liquid diet like soups and shakes, you are actually making your gut go in for some rest. So it depends. Again, what are the health targets? Losing weight, if it is one of the targets, then I would suggest no, because one day of being on a liquid diet will actually reduce your calories too much. And for a healthy human being, in the normal course of time, I do not suggest any diet which is less than 1200 kilocalories per day, because 1200 is an average figure of the amount of calories which is required for the basal functioning of our body. The BMR, the basic involuntary activities that our body is doing, the body needs energy for that, for our heartbeat, for our digestion, for our kidneys to function, for our blood to flow, for our muscles to work. For all of this, even while we sleep, our body is at work. So the amount of energy required required by our body, that 1200 kilocalories per day. If you're going on a liquid diet, unless and until there is some particular health target in your mind, for a sluggish gut, the best thing to do is go for a jog and then come and have a happy, healthy meal plate.
Okay, thank you. Exercise, finally. So
Yes. No, not finally. It has to be there initially.
what I mean is, finally we come back to exercise all the time.
Yes. So start your day with an exercise, half an hour of exercise, and then you are allowed to eat. I am so pro about this exercise thing, because exercise, our human body has been created in such a wonderful way that any machine, if you keep it still, it'll go stale and it'll not work. You have to continuously fuel it, and the more you use, the more it wears and tears, and then after a few years you got to get rid of it. But human body is such that the more you work on it, the better it becomes. If you make it sluggish, you go and at a negative level. The more you exercise, I have come across people who say that if I go for a walk or a jog right in the morning, I'll get tired. I won't be able to sail through my day. I'll feel tired the entire day. It's not so. You'll feel more energetic. The more you exercise, the more you work, the better it will be.
Is exercise good even for those who want to put on weight?
Yes, definitely yes, because exercise is going to improve your metabolism. It is going to improve the absorption of the nutrients in the body, and definitely gives you a healthier body.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah.
Good point.
Meghu, we have a few more questions. Can we go
There's
through
one
them?
Yeah, I think there's one question about root vegetables to avoid for diabetics.
Correct. Yeah.
Crucial
Root vegetables are very high in starch and definitely higher on the glycemic index. So I would say moderation, portion control, that is the key. You can have it, do not avoid it. You can have it in very small portions, looking at the overall composition of your meal plate. So occasionally having a bite or two here and there. Again, keep an eye on your fasting blood glucose levels, HbA1c levels, and your postprandial blood glucose levels, and you can have it.
Great.
Okay. I missed that one. Thanks, Meghu. Then should the intake of fats be less in case of those whose gallbladder has been removed?
It should be, number one, after the surgery for a month or so. Yes, the body needs to adjust to the new change, that is the absence of an important organ in the body. So for a month, yes, the person has to go without oils, but after that, the minimum quantity one should have, because the fat soluble vitamins, if a person goes on a zero fat diet, how will the fat soluble vitamins get absorbed in the body? So the amount of fat does go a little lesser than what a normal healthy human being can have, but do not go on a zero fat diet. And then get your diet analysis done by a qualified person. There are guidelines for gallbladder removal surgeries, the cholecystectomy that we call it. And the person, if you follow the guidelines, you are good to go. I mean, you can have fats, but what kind of fats and what is the amount, that can be discussed.
Here's one question from Vikas. Quantity of fruit and salad is good for an average healthy person. And I want to add one more question to that, saying what are the parameters for a healthy person? What indicates a healthy person?
Okay, I'll answer this in two parts. Fruits and salads. Fruits, basically, I would say 100 grams of fruit per day. In terms of grams, if I say per person, for a healthy person. Salad, we basically consume the carrots, the tomatoes, the beetroots, the cucumbers, the radish. So all of these things one can have depending upon how much is the quantity of the cooked vegetables that you have. So all of this I would club under the vegetables. So fruits are 100 grams and vegetables somewhere around 300 grams. So 2 katori of cooked vegetables and 1 quarter plate of salad is good enough. If a person is having less of cooked vegetables, then you can have 2 plates. So just you can make your own combinations depending on your taste and your preferences.
Your typical katori is how many grams?
Not grams. We count it in milliliters because every food product has got different weights. So 150 ml is 1 katori or 1 serving.
So when you say 100
150
grams
ml.
of fruits, what does that translate to?
100 grams of fruits is 1 medium apple.
Okay, 1 medium.
So you can equate that.
Yeah.
And what was the second part of the question? I missed that.
What are the parameters for a healthy person? We have been talking about a healthy person,
Okay.
person.
Yes. Parameters. Number 1, you have to check your height, weight, and BMI. Number 2, your waist circumference. Number 3, your waist and hip ratio. Number 4, your activity levels. How active do you feel during the day? Do you feel lethargic? Do you get frequent headaches? Do you feel like sitting for a while after 2 to 3 hours of work or not? Can you go for a 2-kilometer walk without getting exhausted? So ultimately, exercise again comes into play. So all these factors give us indications about whether we are healthy or not. Does one catch infections very easily?
Okay.
Is one able to recover fast after catching an infection? So there are a lot of things that we need to look at in a domestic setting, with a person who does not have many tools to assess. We in the clinical setting, we have ABCD, the height, weight measurements, the blood test reports, and then your C is for your clinical symptoms, lethargy, muscle cramps, headaches, and all of these things, and then for dietary intake. So we take everything into perspective, we correlate and then assess. But for a person at home, height, weight, BMI, waist and hip circumference, and the general signals that your body gives. Again, I would say our body is such a wonderful thing, it will give you signals. Anything which goes into a disbalance, the body will give you signals. So just catch those signals and see where does it lead to. Craving for coffee, it comes from magnesium deficiency. Craving for sugars, it comes from things like either poor metabolism or a person has disposition towards pre-diabetes. So we need to catch what and where and why, and just fix it then and there.
Thank you. Very interesting. One question that I got on a private message was, are there any benefits to eating almonds which are soaked overnight, or taking methi which is soaked overnight?
Yes, methi is useful for management of blood glucose levels. Definitely, yes. And it does improve the metabolism. And when we talk about soaked almonds, almonds have got tannins in it. So when we soak them, those molecules become, they break down. And the soaked almonds, when eaten, they are easy to digest and absorb as compared to the raw almonds. So that is why that age-old practice of soaking and then eating, the peeling and then grinding and then eating. So that makes the absorption of nutrients much easier for the body.
Okay, thanks. Well, that's good to know, especially if somebody is a pre-diabetic like I am. So,
almonds are very good for pre-diabetics. Almonds are very, very good for pre-diabetics. One recent research paper, which has come in the year 2020 itself, I would not be able to recall the name of the author. That research was done specially on diabetics, and it was the clinical trial. It was seen that 20 almonds just before the meal time, if taken by a person, helped in the reduction of HbA1c and the reversal of the diabetes.
how often should 20 almonds be taken?
Every day.
Okay.
Every day. So by any of your meal times, wherein, I mean, either some people have a morning glucose spike, some people have an afternoon glucose spikes or evening glucose spike. So if you do not know your values, what you can do is you can have 5 almonds before your breakfast, 5 or 10 at the meal, at the lunch, and 5 or 7 at the dinner time. I'm sure that is going to do wonders to your health.
So there's a question about the almonds. Since you're talking about them, should we remove the skin of the almonds before consuming them?
Yes, it should be removed. Yes.
Or you cannot eat it with the skin?
Preferably no. Preferably no.
Okay. Okay. I think, Meghu, we need to wind up. Is it now? There are some questions. I suppose they can address them directly to Monica.
Yes. Just is there any food for reducing the bad cholesterol? Somebody says, I think Mr. Chandrababu has asked. I know.
HDL. How do we improve
LDL? LDL is a
HDL.
bad cholesterol. No, HDL is a good cholesterol.
So how do we improve HDL? They say exercise improves HDL, but for a person who's idle most of the time and has high HDL, how do you do it?
Include half a spoon of chia seeds soaked. Chia seeds are never to be had dry. Number
Oh.
one, because they swell up when you soak them and they may choke the throat. Always remember to soak. So half a spoon of chia seeds, soak them in half a glass of water for 3 to 4 hours or maybe overnight, and have them any one time of the day. Just fix a time of your day and have them every day. After 3 months, get your blood tests done again and you will see a difference.
Okay.
Nice.
Okay, that's very interesting. So there's one more question about dry fruits, saying how much are dry fruits appropriate to consume for a North Indian living in the plains, not high or the cold mountains? And if yes, how much of the dry fruit is fit to be used?
I guess here the dry fruit is being referred to the oil seeds, the nuts that the almonds and the walnuts that
Figs and the
we
walnuts.
refer to. I guess the person is talking about it. Depends upon how much is the total fat intake. Because these are oil rich. These have a lot of oil. For example, I told you 47% is the oil content in the peanuts. So almonds are also they also have the similar profile. And so a handful of all of it together for a healthy human being, I would say a 10 almonds, 3 to 4 pieces of half walnuts, because they normally come as halves. So I would say half, 3 to 4 of them, 4 to 5 pistachios, and just a handful of peanuts.
Thank
So
you.
altogether, actually, a handful. That's enough. That's enough. Do not overdo. Do not overdo. And then again, look at the amount of fat that the person is intaking in the diet. So that has to be correlated. But for a person who cannot do calculations, a handful.
Okay. Okay. Thanks.
You don't include cashews. Cashews are high fat
Cashews,
content.
no. In cashews have been found to be an agent which increases the cholesterol level. So that is why I intentionally did not mention that.
Okay.
So for the taste, one can have 2 to 3 pieces, but do not make it a regular thing in the diet.
So there was one more question about how to increase HB level,
Hemoglobin.
hemoglobin level.
Hemoglobin. We need to look at the reason why the hemoglobin content is low. Number 3, look at the constipation levels, because constipation means your nutrients are not getting absorbed. And number 4 is eat a lot of fruits. Then you can have more of pomegranates, you can have more of beetroot, and iron rich foods, basically black grams, they are good. So include a variety of these things which are rich in iron and vitamin C, and you will be good to go.
Thank you so much, and thank you everyone for having asked those questions. I am again sharing the contact of Dr. Monica here. You can feel free to reach out to her or to us or to Meghalai. And it's over to Megu or Jay, who's ending the session.
Yeah, over to you, Jay, if you have something to add, the closing comments.
No, I have nothing much to add other than the fact that, Monica, it was a really, really interesting and informative session today. I'm sure that every one of us enjoyed what we heard from you. A lot of information actually to digest. I'm using the word digest here. It would be nice if in the days ahead, if you could wrap this up into some kind of easily appreciable numbers or things that you have already indicated, something that people can have in front of them. Those of them who have requested, we can send it to them, a
Right,
table or
right.
something like that, a short
Sure,
description,
sure,
things like
sure.
that. That would be a good takeaway for today's session. It has been truly, truly exciting and interesting to have this session. You have been very good. The audience has been very active, so that itself is an indicator of a thumbs up here, I would say. One other last comment to everybody here. We are reaching towards the end of the year, and New Year is almost on us. Please stay safe and wear your mask, and adhere as much as possible to what Monica has said, and not really binge out over the New Year. That's about
Exercise.
it. Meg, you want to give the word of thanks and
Thanks, Jay.
and close
Thanks.
the session.
Wonderfully enlightening session, Dr. Monica, and excellent moderation by Jay, as usual. So you've busted so many myths, Dr. Monica, and you've given us some very valuable guidelines. And it was mind-boggling to absorb so much of information. So
Yes.
the participants here, the Facebook Live is there, right there. The links are also shared in the chat box, so you can always go back and listen to certain portions where you need to. And this session will also be uploaded on YouTube. And for future sessions, somebody asked, please like LBN Tech Solutions Facebook page so that you can get to know about future webinars, which every month, last Saturday, we'll be having one healthcare expert. And the next speaker is Dr. Geeta Manjunath. She's the CEO and founder of Niramai Health Analytics Bangalore. And it is a deep tech startup. She heads that, addressing critical healthcare problems through automated solutions. So she will be actually talking on IT in healthcare, which is really, really important these days. So mark your calendars, participants, for 30th January. And thanks participants for logging in from across India and across the globe. We have one participant from Doha. Thank you so much for joining. And a special thanks to all our regulars who have been present every month. Thanks for being here, and have a lovely weekend, all of you. See you all next month, last Saturday of next month, for another session of Healthcare Insights. Thank you, Dr. Monica, and thank you
so much. Thank you so much for having me here. And I feel glad when I share my knowledge with the people. I try and make things easier for them, and it's my passion to help people live a healthier life and to get rid of all the myths. And it's easy. It's not so difficult. Do not think about the calculations. Just have a good, healthy meal plate. Include everything. Do not run about after the fads. And enjoy. That's what I would say. Enjoy your meals and exercise a bit, and look out for the indicators. That's it. Wish you all health and happiness and a very happy new year.
Thank you.
Very happy new year to everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.